Daniel had never seen rain like this. Cold drops hammered the highway, turning every reflection into a blur. Headlights cut through the darkness like desperate signals from another world. He should have kept driving. Just another stormy night, another chance to avoid trouble. But then he saw her. A figure on the shoulder, crouched beside a crumpled cruiser. Daniel's stomach sank. He parked with his heart pounding, hands shaking, and as he stepped out the wind carried a sound he would never forget, a ragged breath, shallow and fading. Her badge glinted in the storm, barely visible beneath the rain-soaked jacket. Officer Harper's name barely legible through the grime. Blood soaked her sleeve. Her breath came in short, agonized rasping. She was trying to stay awake, to fight, but every second felt like slipping sand through desperate fingers. Daniel felt his feet move toward her, even though every part of his brain screamed to run. He knelt down, and the cold water pooled around his knees. "I saw your car," he whispered, voice cracking. "I didn't know if you were alive." Her eyes opened, just for a moment, and there was a flicker of recognition, a whisper of relief. That was all it took, the fragility of life, the sheer randomness of one decision. If he had looked at his phone for one more second, if he had kept driving, she would have died there, alone, in the rain. Why was she alone out here? What had happened before the crash? And most haunting of all, where was her backup? Before we go deeper into Daniel's impossible choice and the truth behind that stormy night, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Daniel Mercer was 39 years old, the kind of man most people wouldn't notice in a grocery store line. Slightly wrinkled work shirt, tired eyes, phone always in his hand, checking the time. He worked maintenance at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town, the late shift nobody wanted. It paid a little more, and that mattered when you were raising a 12-year-old alone. Every night he told himself he'd find something better, something with daylight and weekends, but bills had a way of making decisions for him. He lived in a small rented duplex with peeling paint and a humming refrigerator that never quite closed right. Nothing about Daniel's life felt heroic. It felt scheduled, stretched, and fragile. And maybe that's why what happened on that highway matters so much. Because heroes don't always start as brave people. Sometimes they start as exhausted parents just trying to get home. 3 years earlier, Daniel had stood in a hospital hallway that smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee while a doctor explained that his wife, Emily, wasn't coming back. A distracted driver. A red light. A moment that split his life into before and after. Since then, everything he did carried a quiet layer of fear. He packed school lunches with military precision. He checked the stove twice before leaving. He kept his phone volume on high at work, just in case the school called. His daughter, Lily, tried to be strong about it, but grief shows up in small ways: lights left on at night, long hugs before school, questions that start with, "Do you think Mom would've?" Daniel still had Emily's last voicemail saved, her voice bright and rushed, asking him to pick up milk. He couldn't delete it. "Would you be able to?" Lily had made him promise something the week before the storm. She stood in the kitchen in oversized pajamas, arms crossed in a way that looked too much like her mother. "Don't drive tired anymore," she said. "If you're sleepy, pull over." "I mean it, Dad." He laughed at first, but she didn't. So he promised, the way parents do when they don't plan to break it but don't know how they'll keep it either. That night, the rain was loud enough to drown out his thoughts, and he could feel the weight behind his eyes, the dull ache of another double shift. He was 10 minutes from home. Lily was there alone, probably pretending not to watch the clock. That's why he didn't want to stop. That's why he almost kept going. Daniel wasn't supposed to be on that stretch of highway at that exact time. He had stayed late fixing a jammed conveyor belt that should have been someone else's problem. 5 minutes earlier, and the officer's car would have still been moving. 5 minutes later, and the cold might have taken what blood loss didn't. Life often changes in those narrow spaces we never notice, the thin slices of time where everything could tilt one way or another. Daniel would think about that for years afterward, how close he came to missing her entirely. Have you ever looked back at a small delay, a traffic light, a phone call, a wrong turn, and realized it changed everything? Because on that road, in that storm, timing wasn't just coincidence. It was the line between a stranger living and dying. What Daniel didn't know yet was who Officer Harper was beyond the badge and the blood and the fading breath. He didn't know she had started her shift just an hour earlier. He didn't know she had called for backup that never reached her in time. He didn't know that by stopping, by kneeling in the freezing rain instead of driving past, he was stepping into a story that would follow both of them long after the sirens faded. Right then, he was just a father who wanted to get home to his daughter, holding pressure on a wound with shaking hands, whispering, "Stay with me," to someone he had never met. And if you were in his place, with your child waiting at home, would you have stopped too? Daniel's car idled crooked on the shoulder, one tire half in the wet grass, headlights shaking in the rain as if even the machine was nervous. For a moment, he just sat there, fingers locked around the steering wheel, breath fogging the windshield. He could still choose to leave. Call it in from farther down the road. Tell himself someone else would handle it. Then lightning flashed, bright enough to turn night into silver daylight, and he saw the uniform clearly for the first time. Dark fabric. Badge. Duty belt. His stomach dropped. This wasn't just someone in trouble. This was a police officer, alone, hurt, and far from help. Daniel pushed the door open and the cold hit him like a wall, rain soaking through his shirt in seconds as he ran toward her, every step heavy with fear he didn't have a name for yet. Up close, the scene made even less sense. There was no patrol car nearby, no flashing lights, no sign of a collision except scraped gravel and a long, dark skid mark leading off the road and disappearing into a ditch. Her radio lay a few feet away, cracked open, wires exposed like veins. Blood streaked across her sleeve and pooled beneath her shoulder, diluted pink by the rainwater rushing past. Daniel knelt beside her, hands hovering uselessly over the wound, afraid to touch and more afraid not to. "I don't know what to do," he muttered, voice breaking. He had never taken a first aid class. The only emergency he'd ever handled alone was a fever at 2 in the morning. This was different. This was life slipping away in front of him, and he felt completely unprepared. He fumbled for his phone, nearly dropping it in the water. One bar of signal flickered at the top of the screen, then disappeared, then came back like it was deciding whether his panic was worth noticing. He dialed emergency services anyway, turning his body, lifting the phone higher, whispering, come on, like that might convince the sky to cooperate. The call connected, then broke into static, the operator's voice cutting in and out. He gave the highway number twice, then a third time, shouting over the rain, terrified they couldn't hear him. Behind him, cars rushed past in the far lanes, tires hissing on wet pavement, none of them slowing. The world was still moving like nothing was wrong. Have you ever been in a moment so intense it feels like time should stop for everyone, but it doesn't? She moved then, a small, painful shift that pulled his attention back to her. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then locking onto his face like she was trying to memorize it. Her lips parted. "Please," she started, the word barely more than air. He leaned closer, rain dripping from his hair onto her jacket. "I'm here," he said quickly. "Help is coming. Just stay with me." She tried again, jaw trembling with the effort, but the sentence wouldn't form. Whatever she was fighting to say seemed important, urgent, bigger than the pain tearing through her. Her hand lifted weakly, fingers slick with rain and blood, and grabbed his sleeve with surprising strength. Her grip made his heart slam harder than any siren could. Daniel bent closer, ear inches from her mouth, straining to catch every broken sound. Her breath hitched, shallow and uneven. "Don't," she whispered, eyes wide now, not with pain but with something else. Fear. A different kind. Her fingers tightened in the fabric of his jacket like she was holding on to the last solid thing in the world. "Don't, trust," the final word dissolved into a gasp, her head turning slightly to the side as her strength gave out again. Daniel froze, the unfinished warning echoing louder than the storm. "Don't trust who? Another officer? Someone on the road? Him?" The question settled into his chest like ice. And as he looked around at the empty highway, the broken radio, and the darkness pressing in from every side, one thought rose above the rest. What if the danger that did this to her wasn't gone? An hour before Daniel ever turned onto that highway, Officer Elena Brooks sat alone in her patrol car with the engine off and the rain just beginning to tap against the windshield. The parking lot behind the closed hardware store was dark, the kind of place officers used for paperwork when they needed quiet. Elena wasn't doing paperwork. A manila envelope rested on the passenger seat, thick, creased, and sealed with more care than any traffic report. Inside were copies she had made that afternoon, documents she had read 3 times just to make sure she wasn't misunderstanding what they showed. Her jaw had been tight ever since. Elena had built a reputation over 9 years on the force for being steady, fair, and impossible to pressure. People in her precinct trusted her. That was exactly why what she had discovered felt so heavy. 2 weeks earlier, Elena had filed an internal report about missing evidence tied to a narcotics arrest. Small things at first, a logged item that never made it to storage, a signature that didn't match, a body camera clip that ended too early. Most officers would have let it go, called it paperwork errors in an overworked department. Elena didn't. She stayed late, cross-checking reports, pulling old case files, following a trail that led somewhere she never expected. The deeper she looked, the more the pattern repeated. Evidence gone. Reports altered. Charges quietly reduced. Someone with access, someone who understood the system, was bending it for reasons that didn't belong in a badge and uniform. Have you ever realized a place you believed in wasn't what you thought, and felt your stomach drop as the truth settled in? She hadn't told many people. Just one supervisor, earlier that evening, and even then she had chosen her words carefully, watching his reaction more than listening to her own voice. He had nodded too quickly, said he'd look into it, and suggested she hand over anything she had collected. Elena agreed, but something in her gut told her to make copies first. That's why the envelope sat beside her now instead of in a desk drawer at the station. She planned to drop it off with internal affairs first thing in the morning, bypassing the normal chain of command. It was a risk, one that could stall her career or make her a target of quiet resentment. Still, she believed in the oath she took. If the system was sick, ignoring it wouldn't make it better. Dispatch had offered to pair her with another unit for the rest of the shift because of the weather, but Elena declined. She said she had routine patrol to finish, a few follow-ups on noise complaints, nothing serious. The truth was, she wanted space to think and time to decide exactly who she could trust with what she knew. Working alone gave her control over the radio, over her route, over who knew where she was at any given moment. At least, that's what she thought. When she finally pulled back onto the road, wipers fighting the rain, she glanced once at the envelope and told herself she was doing the right thing. She had no idea someone else already knew she had those papers. Minutes later, a vehicle fell in behind her, far enough back to look casual, close enough to stay with her through 2 turns and a long stretch of empty highway. Elena noticed. Of course she did. She changed lanes once. The vehicle did too. Her fingers tightened on the wheel. She reached for the radio, about to call in a routine check, when static burst through the speaker, sharp and sudden. She adjusted the volume, tried again, but the signal crackled like a storm had settled inside the device. In her rearview mirror, headlights held steady, unblinking. The envelope on the seat seemed heavier than before, as if the paper inside understood the danger before she fully did. Elena accelerated slightly, telling herself she was being cautious, not afraid. She had handled tense situations before. Domestic disputes. Armed robberies. High-speed pursuits. But this felt different because it was quiet, controlled, and personal. Whoever was behind her wasn't trying to pass. They were waiting. Watching. Choosing their moment. And when her radio finally went dead and the road curved into a darker, less traveled stretch of highway, the distance between them began to close. What happened next would leave her alone in the rain, fighting to stay conscious long enough to warn a stranger. And the person responsible for putting her there was closer to the police force than anyone imagined. Back on the side of the highway, the storm felt louder, closer, like the night itself was leaning in to listen. Daniel's knees ached against the gravel, hands pressed hard against Officer Brooks' shoulder where the bleeding wouldn't stop. The rain had thinned to a steady sheet, but every sound carried farther now, the rush of passing cars, the rattle of branches, the uneven pull of her breathing. For a few fragile seconds, hope flickered. She was still alive. The dispatcher had caught enough of his broken call to promise units were on the way. He just had to hold on. She just had to hold on. He kept talking to her, voice shaking, telling her about his daughter, about how help was coming, about anything that sounded like a future. Then he heard it. A sharp crunch from the tree line beyond the ditch, the unmistakable snap of a branch under weight. Daniel's head jerked up. The woods were a wall of black shapes and shifting shadows, rain dripping from leaves in uneven rhythms. He told himself it was an animal, a deer spooked by the storm, but his heart didn't believe it. His eyes searched the darkness, straining to separate movement from imagination. Officer Brooks' fingers twitched weakly against his sleeve, and he wondered if she heard it too, if that unfinished warning had something to do with whoever, or whatever, might still be out there. Have you ever felt watched when you couldn't prove you were, and realized that sometimes instinct is louder than logic? Headlights appeared in the distance, twin beams cutting through the mist. Relief surged through him so fast it almost made him dizzy. He stood halfway, waving one arm, the other still pressing down on the wound. "Hey! Hey!" he shouted, voice raw. The car slowed as it approached, tires hissing on the wet pavement. For a moment, he saw the driver's silhouette turn toward them. Then, just as quickly, the vehicle accelerated and disappeared down the highway, taillights shrinking into red dots swallowed by rain. The hope drained out of him, replaced by a colder, sharper fear. What if that driver had seen everything and chosen not to get involved? Or worse, what if they had slowed down because they were checking whether the job was finished? Daniel's mind raced in circles he couldn't control. His phone showed no signal again. The dispatcher's voice was gone. The woods behind him felt closer with every second, every drip of water sounding like a footstep, every gust of wind like a breath he couldn't see. He imagined someone standing just beyond the trees, watching him kneel beside the officer, waiting for him to make a mistake or turn his back. His chest tightened, and for a split second, his survival instinct screamed at him to get in the car and leave. Lily's face filled his mind, her messy ponytail, the porch light she always left on when he worked late. She was home alone. If something happened to him out here, she would have no one. He looked down at Officer Brooks, at the pale strain in her face, the way her lips parted with each shallow breath like she was trying to hold onto the world by will alone. If he left, she would bleed out in the dark. No badge, no partner, no last words heard. Just another headline people would scroll past. His daughter had asked him not to drive tired because she was afraid of losing him too. But what would he be teaching her if he walked away from someone dying right in front of him? That fear matters more than doing what's right? That helping only counts when it's safe? The questions hit harder than the rain. Another sound came from the trees, softer this time, like fabric brushing against bark. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He leaned closer to her, lowering his voice. "You're not alone," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was promising her or himself. His hands stopped shaking. The fear was still there, heavy and real, but something steadier rose underneath it. Resolve. He adjusted his grip, pressing harder on the wound, ignoring the ache in his arms and the cold seeping into his bones. Whoever might be out there, whatever danger still lingered in the dark, he made his choice in that moment. He wasn't leaving her. At first, Daniel thought the sound was in his head, a faint wail tangled in the wind. Then it grew louder, clearer, rising and falling in a way that made his chest loosen for the first time all night. Sirens. Real ones. Not passing cars. Not imagination. Red and blue lights began to flicker against the wet trees, reflections jumping across puddles and the side of his car. He almost laughed from the relief of it, the kind that leaves you shaky and lightheaded. "They're coming," he told Officer Brooks, his voice breaking with something close to tears. "You hear that? You made it." Her eyes didn't open, but her breathing hitched like her body recognized the sound even if her mind couldn't hold on to it. 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop, followed by an ambulance that parked at an angle, back doors already swinging open. Paramedics rushed toward them with a stretcher, movements fast and practiced. Questions flew at Daniel all at once. How long has she been like this? Where's the vehicle? Is there anyone else hurt? He tried to answer, words tripping over each other as he stepped back, hands slick and red in the flashing lights. They took over with calm efficiency, cutting fabric, applying pressure, starting lines. One of them nodded to the other, something unspoken passing between them, and within seconds they were lifting her onto the stretcher. Daniel felt strangely empty as his hands left her, like he'd been holding more than just a wound. More police vehicles arrived, tires crunching on gravel, radios buzzing with overlapping voices. The quiet, isolated stretch of road transformed into a scene full of motion and authority. Officers moved through the area with flashlights, scanning the ditch, the tree line, the skid marks Daniel had noticed earlier. Yet beneath the activity, something felt off. A few of them glanced at Daniel, then quickly looked away when he tried to meet their eyes. One officer, younger, opened his mouth like he wanted to ask a question, but a sharp look from someone else made him turn and walk the other direction. The air felt charged, but not just with urgency. With something unspoken. A tall, gray-haired officer with captain's bars on his collar approached Daniel while the ambulance doors slammed shut behind him. "Sir, we need you to step back," he said, voice firm but oddly flat. "You've done enough here." Daniel nodded, still catching his breath. "She tried to say something," he added quickly. "Before you got here." "She said, don't trust," the captain cut him off with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're in shock. It's been a long night. A deputy will take your statement." He gestured toward the far side of the road, already turning away before Daniel could finish. No one else asked what she had whispered. Not one person. Daniel stood there, rain dripping from his hair, watching as the ambulance pulled away with its lights still flashing but siren now silent, like the emergency had been swallowed instead of announced. Officers continued moving around him, but he felt strangely invisible, like he had stepped outside the center of the story the moment professionals arrived. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from Lily asking if he was close to home. His hands trembled as he typed back, "On my way," even though he couldn't seem to make his feet move yet. In the glow of patrol lights and the hush of low voices, a quiet unease settled into his chest. Daniel didn't know it yet, but stopping on that road hadn't just saved a life. It had placed him on a collision course with the police department itself. Officer Elena Brooks did not die on that highway. She came close, closer than anyone outside that operating room will ever understand, but she survived. The bullet had grazed her shoulder after the crash, doctors later said, and blood loss had done the rest. 3 surgeries in 12 hours. A medically induced coma. For days, her name sat in the corner of local news broadcasts beneath the words, "critical but stable." Daniel watched every update from his living room, Lily curled beside him, both of them quiet in a way that felt like waiting for exam results that could change a life. Relief came slowly, cautiously, when the hospital announced she had opened her eyes. But relief didn't answer the questions clawing at the back of his mind. A week later, Daniel received a call from a number he didn't recognize. The woman on the other end introduced herself as an investigator with internal affairs. Her tone was polite, careful, and far more serious than he expected. She asked him to come in, to go over his statement again. "There are a few inconsistencies we need to clarify," she said. Daniel almost laughed at the word inconsistencies. He had replayed that night 100 times already, the rain, the broken radio, her hand gripping his sleeve. What could possibly be unclear? Still, he agreed. Something in her voice told him this wasn't routine follow-up. This was the beginning of something else. The police building felt different in daylight. Smaller. Less dramatic. Daniel sat in a plain room with a metal table and a camera in the corner, hands folded tight to stop them from fidgeting. Across from him sat 2 investigators, folders open, expressions unreadable. They asked him to describe everything again, from the moment he saw the shape on the roadside to the moment the ambulance doors closed. He told them about the skid mark, the missing patrol car, the broken radio in the mud. One investigator paused, pen hovering. "Broken radio?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, it was a few feet from her. Looked smashed." The two exchanged a glance that lasted half a second too long. They slid a copy of the official incident report across the table. Daniel scanned it, confusion building line by line. According to the report, Officer Brooks' patrol vehicle had malfunctioned and rolled into the ditch. Her radio, it stated, was recovered intact inside the car. No mention of skid marks. No mention of another vehicle. No mention of a civilian finding her before backup arrived. "That's not what I saw," Daniel said quietly, tapping the paper. "And she said something to me. She tried to warn me." The older investigator leaned back in his chair. "There's no record of that," he replied. And none of the responding officers reported a damaged radio at the scene. A cold realization settled over Daniel, heavier than fear, heavier than shock. The details he remembered so clearly weren't just being questioned. They were being erased. Evidence he had pointed out that night was now listed as non-existent. The timeline in the report placed the first officer on scene minutes before Daniel claimed to have arrived. It was as if his presence, his hands covered in her blood, had been edited out of the story entirely. Have you ever told the truth about something you lived through, only to have someone in authority look at you like memory itself was the problem? In that small room, Daniel understood something he never wanted to believe: someone wasn't mistaken. Someone was lying. When he left the building, the sky was painfully bright, the normal sounds of traffic and conversation almost insulting after what he'd just heard. His phone buzzed with another news alert about Officer Brooks' ongoing recovery, and the department's full transparency. The words felt hollow now. Transparency didn't hide evidence. Transparency didn't rewrite timelines. As Daniel stood in the parking lot, keys clenched in his fist, one thought cut through every other: this was no longer about a roadside rescue. It was about what Officer Brooks had uncovered, and who was willing to kill to keep it buried. The pressure started subtly, the way most serious threats do. A follow-up call from someone at the department asking Daniel if he was sure about certain details. A suggestion that trauma can affect memory, that maybe the rain and the shock had blurred things. It would help everyone if the statement stayed simple, the voice said gently, like they were offering him a favor instead of a warning. Daniel hung up with a tight chest and a feeling he couldn't shake, that the truth had suddenly become inconvenient. Over the next few days, 2 more calls came from blocked numbers. No one said their name. One just breathed for a moment before disconnecting. Another voice, low and calm, said, "You have a daughter, right? Focus on her." That was the one that made his hands go cold. Daniel didn't tell Lily about the calls, but fear changed the way he moved through the world. He checked the locks twice at night. Walked her to the bus stop instead of watching from the porch. He told himself it was just his imagination running wild, that no one would go after a kid, that this was all intimidation meant to scare him quiet. Then the school called. Lily had received a note slipped into her locker, no name, no handwriting she recognized. Just 3 words written in thick black marker: "Tell your dad." That was all. No threat spelled out, no explanation. Somehow that made it worse. The message didn't need details. It was a reminder that someone was watching close enough to reach into his child's day. Daniel sat at the kitchen table that night long after Lily went to bed, the note lying flat under the yellow light. His mind split in 2 directions that refused to meet. One part of him wanted to call the investigator back and say he'd been mistaken, that maybe the radio had been in the car after all, that maybe he'd misheard her final words. He could make this stop. He could shrink his world back down to work shifts and school pickups and quiet grief. The other part of him saw Officer Brooks on that road, fighting to breathe, using her last strength to warn a stranger. If he backed down, what had she suffered for? What kind of example would he set for Lily? That truth only matters when it's safe. Slowly, Pieces of the bigger picture began to reach him through hushed conversations and one nervous call from a young officer who refused to give his name. Officer Brooks hadn't just filed a complaint. She had flagged a fellow officer in her own precinct, someone decorated, respected, the kind of cop people pointed to as proof the system worked. Allegations of tampered evidence. Payments that didn't match his salary. Cases that fell apart quietly when he was involved. The department hadn't announced any of it publicly. Instead, they had placed him on administrative reassignment, a phrase that sounded like a vacation instead of scrutiny. The more Daniel heard, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't a few bad decisions. It was protection from the inside. When Daniel drove past the station now, he noticed the flags out front, the slogans about service and integrity painted on the walls. He wanted to believe them. Most of the officers he'd met that night had worked hard to save her life. Good people existed in that building. But so did someone who might have tried to silence her, and others who seemed willing to look the other way. The lines between right and wrong, loyalty and justice, had blurred into something murky and dangerous. Daniel wasn't part of law enforcement. He was just a father who had stopped his car. Yet somehow he had become a loose thread in a story powerful people were trying to stitch closed. If the people meant to protect the truth are hiding it, who do you trust? Weeks after the rescue, Daniel received a call from the Internal Affairs office he hadn't expected, not the polite follow-ups anymore, but the kind of call that made his stomach twist. "We've recovered body cam footage," the voice said. Daniel's mind froze. Footage? He remembered the officer's radio broken, the darkness, the rain, and now, somehow, someone had recorded it all. The investigator warned him the material was sensitive and under review, that it contradicted previous reports, that timestamps didn't match anything anyone had filed. They were altered, deliberately, to make events look different. Skid marks weren't there, backup arrived sooner than it did, Daniel's arrival was missing entirely. Every line he had spoken, every action he had taken, had been minimized, erased, rewritten. And yet, the tape told the truth. His truth. As the days unfolded, a horrifying pattern emerged. The suspect, the person who had caused Officer Brooks injuries, wasn't a criminal outsider. It wasn't a gang member or a random driver. The evidence pointed to someone inside the department, someone trained, someone respected. A decorated officer. Maybe a superior. Maybe even someone who had personally trained Brooks herself. Daniel read the reports in disbelief, scanned the footage again and again, trying to reconcile the badge he had trusted with the betrayal he now saw. The person he had saved her from, or at least the person who tried to stop her from speaking, wore the same uniform that promised justice. The revelation sent shockwaves through the precinct. Officers who had spent decades walking the line between law and morality now realized the chain of command itself had been compromised. Years of covered incidents, tampered evidence, unexplained case closures, quiet threats, suddenly made sense. Silence had been rewarded. Speaking up had been punished. Daniel could see it clearly, even from the outside, the system designed to protect the innocent had been weaponized to protect the guilty. And in that moment, the rescue on the roadside became something far bigger than a single act of courage. It was now a piece in a dangerous, sprawling puzzle, one that Daniel hadn't asked to be part of, but couldn't ignore. Every decision, every whisper, every erased record pointed to the same bitter truth: when the people meant to uphold justice are the ones hiding it, the consequences ripple farther than anyone can imagine. Months of tension came to a head one chilly morning when the decorated officer, the one who had been Brooks' trainer and mentor, finally faced consequences. Under mounting pressure from Internal Affairs and the irrefutable body cam footage, he resigned, a statement framed as personal reasons, but everyone who watched the hearings understood what it really was. The news spread like wildfire. Local papers ran headlines about a scandal at the heart of the precinct, online forums buzzed with outrage and disbelief, and officers who had once walked the line quietly now debated openly in the halls. The department split in ways no one expected. Some defended the man out of loyalty, others demanded sweeping reforms. The air inside the station shifted permanently. The trust that had been assumed for decades had fractured, leaving everyone to navigate a new, uncomfortable truth. The courtroom where Officer Brooks testified was silent, save for the occasional shuffle of papers and the sharp intake of breath from the gallery. She recounted every moment she remembered, the missing evidence, the quiet threats, the evening she almost didn't survive. Her voice was steady, though the strain in her eyes betrayed the nights she had relived that storm again and again. Daniel sat at the back, holding Lily's hand tight. He felt every word, every pause, every glance she directed toward the jury as if it carried not only her life, but the lives of everyone she had sworn to protect. Lily squeezed his hand, her small fingers pressing into his palm, and Daniel realized that courage wasn't inherited, it was shared in moments like this, when one person's truth demanded the world listen. Outside the courtroom, the public reaction was fierce. Citizens demanded accountability. Editorials dissected the scandal, praised Brooks' integrity, and questioned the culture that allowed such betrayal to flourish. For Daniel, it was a strange mix of relief and weight. The person he had saved months ago was alive, justice had been forced to the surface, yet the echoes of what nearly happened haunted him still. He thought back to the roadside, the rain, the way her hand had gripped his sleeve, the whispered warning he hadn't understood at the time. That single choice, that moment of courage, had triggered a chain reaction that exposed decades of secrecy, fear, and silence. One man stopped on a dark road, and exposed what an entire system tried to hide. Months later, the air felt different. Rain no longer hammered the streets, and Daniel noticed how quiet mornings could be without the weight of sirens and fear pressing down. Officer Elena Brooks was walking again, slower than before, cautious with her movements, but alive. The accident that had nearly claimed her life was now a memory softened by recovery, though she carried the scars, the reminders, the quiet strength born from surviving something no one should have faced alone. She attended Lily's school event that spring, standing slightly apart from the other parents, but smiling when the music began, eyes scanning the crowd until she found the small girl waving eagerly toward her father. Lily ran forward, skipping over wet patches of grass, and Brooks knelt to meet her at eye level. "Thank you," she said, voice warm, steady. "Not just for today, but for that night. Your dad saved my life." Lily beamed, cheeks flushed, pride and relief mixing in a way only children seem to do naturally. Daniel watched from the back, chest tight, remembering the rain, the shaking hands, the shallow breaths, the whispered warning he hadn't understood until months later. In that moment, the years of grief, fear, and sleepless nights felt lighter. There was a thread of closure, fragile, but real, stretching from that highway to the schoolyard. Later, at home, Daniel sat quietly in the living room with the hum of the refrigerator and the muted light of the evening. He pulled out his phone, hesitated, then pressed play on Emily's last voicemail. Her voice, bright and rushed, filled the small apartment. For a moment, he held it close, imagining her laughing at some small, ordinary thing. Then he stopped the recording, and slowly, deliberately, pressed delete. No rewind, no replay. He let the past rest, letting himself finally step forward into a life where he could still protect, still love, still choose. He glanced at Lily, her homework spread across the table, her small fingers brushing his shoulder, and felt the quiet certainty of survival, courage, and the fragile, enduring power of choice. What do you think you would have done that night? Would you have stopped, or driven past?